Okay, ladies and gentlemen, so today we're going to focus our screencast on the French and Indian War. And for our purposes, as far as the British colonies and eventually what becomes the United States of America, the French and Indian War is a huge turning point in colonial history. So one of the things you want to keep in mind is comparing life in colonial America before the French and Indian War and then after the French and Indian War. So the dates of the French and Indian War, 1754 to 1763. Remember those and kind of remember those as before and after kind of being a major turning point in our class and a turning point in many different relationships, including British and the colonies, Native Americans and the American colonists, French and the English, both in Europe and in North America. So what we're going to start with, we're going to treat this just like a lesson in class. So we're going to start with the causes of the French and Indian War. So when you look at why the French and Indian War is fought. There's actually a few wars that take place before it that kind of lead up to the French and Indian War. So when you take a look at the map here, uh, in the French and Indian War and the three wars that come before it, this territory that's kind of like striped blue and red, that's the territory that's being fought over. So we're going to refer to it as, there's a couple of names that we could call it, but the official name we're going to call it as far as the French and Indian War is concerned is the Ohio River Valley country. So that refers to this area right here that's like around the Great Lakes, partially upstate New York, western Pennsylvania, Michigan, like this territory right around here. In our class, we've been referring to that part of the British colonies as the back country. And so some of these names, you can use both, but when you're referring to the French and Indian War, the better term to use is the Ohio River Valley country. So first to understand the causes. Really what's happening here is you have the French control what today is kind of like our Midwestern part of the United States, and they control Canada, parts of Canada. The British control all along the Atlantic seaboard here, the 13 colonies. And what's happening here is that the territory in between them, you have Native American tribes that live here. So you have the Iroquois and a bunch of other smaller tribes like the Delaware, Senecas, a lot of smaller tribes that live there. But what's happening is that this territory is being disputed. The British backcountry settlers are trying to extend westward and move westward because they want more land, they want more territory, they want to expand across the Appalachian Mountains. And what they're running into is they're running into French establishments. So you have different forts here, like Fort Duquesne, Fort Necessity, some big French forts, and the French don't want them to expand. So it's kind of a North American struggle, but it's also a global struggle. What you want to remember here is a colonial and international global struggle between the French and the British. And these wars, they happen in North America, but they also happen back in Europe. So there's three wars that take place before the French and Indian War. So you have a war called Queen Anne's War, King William's War, and King George's War. So I'll repeat them. You have Queen Anne's War, King William's War, and King George's War. Now, the specifics of each of the wars are not really necessary for you guys to know. Um, Even the wars themselves, if you don't remember all three of the wars, it's okay. But what you want to understand about all of the wars is that they're all kind of being fought over this backcountry Ohio River Valley territory. And the important thing about them is that, for the most part, the two um, superpowers at the time, the French and the British, are going to clash. Not much really changes hands though. So it just kind of like increases and ratchets up the tension. And the last war, which is King George's War, that's the one that's going to kind of really lead into the French and Indian War. So these three smaller wars, they lead into this bigger war, the French and Indian War. And so the tension between the British and the French just starts to increase. Now, when you look at the French and Indian War itself, what's happening here, to get the basics of it, this is the French and Indian War is the North American part of a larger war that's taking place called the Seven Years' War. And so the Seven Years' War, it rages in Europe, it's in the Caribbean islands, it's in North America, It's in the Indian Ocean. It's fought basically on all different continents, all over the world, and it's a major global power struggle between the French and the English, and the Spanish are also involved in it. So it's major colonial powers kind of duking it out to see who's going to kind of become the supreme colonial power, and especially in North America, it's gonna have big impact. So for our purposes, the people that are involved in it. So why it's called the French and Indian War? In America, actually, it lasts not 7 years; it lasts 9 years, from 1754 to 1763. But why it's called the French and Indian War is what happens here is that you have the French and their Indian allies fighting against the British. And so for the most part, the British get very little Native American help. They get a little bit, but not much Native American help. And the reason being is that what we talked about earlier, the relationship between the French and the Native Americans is just, it's better. And the reasons are the French are not really trying to take the land to settle on it. They're mostly involved in trading, fur trading. And so it's not causing that same conflict that British settlers are causing with Native American tribes. And so most of your Native American tribes are going to ally themselves with the French. And so what happens is you have all of these like smaller Native American tribes are going to ally themselves with the French. So you have like the Hurons, what's remaining of the Hurons, which is not much at this point, but a lot of the other smaller Native American tribes. The only Native American tribe that eventually is going to help out the British a little bit is going to be the Iroquois. And so like all of the Iroquois' enemies are going to ally themselves with the French. So you kind of have that dynamic going on. French and their Indian allies, mostly just the British, fighting against these French and Indian allies. Now, some interesting developments. As far as the war itself, for our purposes, you're not too concerned with battles and things like that, but most of the war takes place in the backcountry area, okay? So we're talking about a lot of it, the fighting is done in upstate New York, western Pennsylvania, Ohio, right around like the Great Lakes region. And so not much of it's taking place. Basically, none of it's taking place in like the more populated areas of the British colonies right along the coast. It's all kind of backcountry fighting. So that's the first important thing to know, where the battles are taking place, who's most affected by it. So if it's backcountry fighting, of course, mostly the backcountry people are going to be more affected by it than the coastal people will be. Again, that western-eastern division within the colonies. Now, the other important thing for our purposes, very important, is kind of how the British colonies at this point react to the conflict. So this famous political cartoon, I have a feeling most of you guys have seen this before in earlier social studies classes, uh, but I would imagine you saw it in a later context. You saw it with the American Revolution and not with the French and Indian War. So what a lot of people don't know is that this cartoon is originally created during the French and Indian War to try and convince the colonies to work together to fight off the French. Now it's revived later on in the American Revolution, but that's not the original time that it's created. It's not the original purpose. So let's kind of talk about this a little bit, because what's going on here is that the colonies, they hold a meeting for the first time, and this is very important because it's the first time that the individual colonies try to work together to fight off a common threat, or just to come together and kind of pool resources and pool ideas. So they come together and they're going to have a meeting. So the meeting is called the Albany Plan of Union. Okay, and this takes place right in the beginning of the French and Indian War, 1754. So again, the name of the meeting is called the Albany Plan of Union. It takes place in Albany in upstate New York, and representatives are sent from each of the colonies. So Virginia sends representatives, South Carolina, Maryland, the Massachusetts, all the different colonies send representatives to Albany. Now the goal here in the Albany Plan of Union is to try and formulate some kind of colonial collective response uh, to the French and Indian War, and to stop kind of French aggression and to fight against the French. So what they try to do here is they try and get each colony to pool its money, pool its resources, uh, bring men. Each colony was supposed to offer soldiers, and they were supposed to fight together as one colonial force, and they were going to be funded together by all the British colonies. Now, this is important because, like I said before, this is the first time that they try to work together. They see each other as having a common interest, common enemy to work against, and they try to pool their resources and pool their ideas and men and everything together to work as one unit. Instead of seeing themselves as like a New Yorker or somebody from New Jersey or from Virginia, they're starting to potentially see themselves as working together as one group. That's the first important thing because this is going to happen again several times in American history. Later on, after the French and Indian War, they hold a Congress called the Stamp Act Congress. Then, of course, you guys probably know of the Continental Congresses that they hold together to try and like work together as one group. So that's the first important thing. The second thing is that in this case, it doesn't work. So at this point, 1754, they're not willing to kind of give up their autonomy as colonies. So Virginia might not trust Massachusetts. They don't agree to kind of work together. They're unwilling to give up their ability to uh, choose on their own what can and can't be done. And so it's hard for us to understand because we look at them as states, a part of our country. They very much look at themselves as their own political entity, almost like their colonies, but their own like mini countries. So they kind of, there's no sense of being an American yet. There might be a sense of being a British subject at this point, but they don't have this idea that a New Yorker is also an American. They hold their loyalty to their colony and maybe to the British, but not really to this whole idea of being an American. So this is their first attempt to try and formulate that politically and economically, come together, but it's unsuccessful. So that's a very important development in colonial America. And so this famous political cartoon actually is trying to convince the colonies to work together during the French and Indian War. And then later on during the American Revolution, it's revived and kind of comes back. And in that case, it's successful and we actually do work together. Okay, now the war itself, what's going to happen in the war itself, uh, the British are eventually going to end up winning the conflict. And this is going to have huge effects as far as North America is concerned, global politics is concerned. So we're just going to focus in this screencast on just some short-term effects because after the test, we're going to really talk about some of the in-depth, long-term effects of the French and Indian War because it has huge effects on the society. Now, when you look at just short-term effects, what happens basically is that the French are going to lose all of their North American colonies. So pretty much everything in North America is gone. So they lose everything basically east of the Mississippi River, the French are going to lose to the British. The British gain all of French Canada. They gain all of this Ohio country. So the British kind of, by winning this war, double the size of their colony or double the size of their territory. And the only really colony that the French keep is going to be Haiti. So like their Caribbean island, and that's it. And so they negotiated for that because they saw the Caribbean island as the most valuable colony that they owned. But this is going to mean huge things for the British. So seemingly a good thing, they knocked out their big enemy. Is going to cause a lot of conflict and a lot of problems within managing these new territories and managing these new colonies. And so this is what we're really going to talk about, upcoming in our class, because it's going to be huge effects for causing the American Revolution and kind of the colonists and the British kind of drifting more apart instead of kind of coming together after this great victory that they had. Now, the last thing that you guys are going to do, so your assignment, which I already posted on Emoto for you guys along with the screencast, but what you have to do is kind of take the events of the French and Indian War and try and explain how you think things are going to either stay the same or change in these three areas, A, B, and C, after the French and Indian War. Because this war, like I said, major turning point in American history, major turning point in colonial America, and has big implications for our country and the creation of our country. All right, guys, good luck with studying for the test, and I'll see you guys on Tuesday.